Hello followers, Fitteth22 here. Before we begin, know that this story is not for the faint of heart or weak-stomached. There are some very disturbing scenes depicted throughout this story, the most gruesome involving an infant. So if you are not one for this horror, that's alright. A new, tamer video will be coming soon. But for those who stick around after this warning, and then complain to me in the comments about this video's content, I don't know what to tell you. Now, without any further interruption, let's delve into the dark together. I can't remember how it started. I was lost, but not lost like I'd taken a wrong turn or gone hiking without a map. I was lost in the existential sense, lost on my journey through life. Incredibly lost. We all were. They all were. The ones still there, I mean. You have to be really lost to find your way to the movement. I don't remember much of my old life. I wasn't a junkie or anything like that, though. I had a house, there was a woman, kids, maybe mine, maybe not. I don't know. But they were definitely around a lot. Maybe I was an uncle. What if I was a grandpa? Being with the movement destroys your skin and hair, see? All that time out in the desert ages you some. I don't know how much some is in my case, though. I could be anywhere from 35 to 60. I guess I'll have to wait until I heal to get a clearer picture. They can't check using my dental, of course. The teeth got ground to dust from clenching my jaw so hard after a month or so. Same as the others. Not like I had any ID when I got found either, and my face is too banged up and swollen to be recognized on a database yet. Gotta sit tight for my answers. Ain't that dandy. Still, good thing I've got you guys to pass the time, right? Maybe typing some of this out will jog my memory. Who knows? The doc certainly seems to think so. Sort of the spooks in suits always guarding the door. The ones who check in periodically to repeat the same line of questioning over and over. How many? Do they have a leader? Where are they going? What's the end goal? Did you communicate? How did you escape it? Such bullshit. Well, not bullshit, I guess. The movement has to be stopped. Spook 1 and Spook 2 have my full support there, that's for damn sure. Asking me the same questions 4 times a day for the past week, though, that is bullshit. I'll give you the same answers I gave them. At least 1,000. Don't know, don't know, don't know, no. Rock fell on my head. Let's try and piece this back together, though, shall we? It's you and me versus the world, shitty laptop. So let's get to it. Maybe if I can get enough of it out in writing, they'll leave me the hell alone. Let me rest, come to terms with... Well, I don't have any legs, never mind memories. The movement has to be stopped, but... Well, just if the spooks could just let me breathe a little first, you know? Anyhow, as I said, I don't remember much from before the movement, but I remember I wasn't homeless, an alcoholic, or on drugs. I was functional, speaking in the prejudicial societal sense. I fit in, had everything locked down, had a good job, because I don't remember worrying about money, but I do remember hating hours trapped in Excel spreadsheets and Python scripts. So, yeah. I wasn't lost like a pastor would condescendingly describe anyone that shows up at a soup kitchen. I was just lost. Lost in myself, in the world, in the abject helplessness of it all. The immaterial death of the happiness I'd spent decades naively presuming comfort and achievement would bring. Existentially lost. Decades of trying only to realize you'd never bother setting a destination. That whole deal. I wasn't some dreg, some shell that was once a man who fell through the cracks. I was living. Not the dream, but definitely the ideal. An ideal, one the TV and movies paint a pretty picture of. That was the problem, though, I think. I wasn't, I didn't want to end it all, not in the abrupt sense, at least. I just didn't necessarily want it all to keep going. I know I lived in a small town in Cali, too, but that's only because of the wildfires. We'll get to the wildfires. Don't you worry. They're important. There was one blazing just outside town on the day I found the movement. I don't remember how I got there, but I was sitting on the bench at some park. I had been working that morning, too, but I only knew that because of how much I could recall my eyes hurting. I used to wear glasses. They fell off and got crushed underfoot 10 weeks ago. I'll get around to that part, shitty laptop. Don't you worry. That day, let's call it W Day, it was smoky. The fire wasn't in the town yet, but was far off. There was an evac order, I think, or someone I knew had asked, maybe begged me to leave town. Was it her? Did I have a wife? I don't remember the conversation or warning, but I do remember feeling stubborn. I remember resisting whatever impulse was urging me to leave before the flames hit and the smoke became suffocating. I was crying, too. That I remembered. God, was I planning to... I mean, I don't know if suicide by inaction is a thing, but if it is, that might be why I was sitting on a bench in the park playing Russian roulette with an encroaching wildfire instead of heading to the freeway to hunker down in the city with whoever that woman and those kids were. I hope I didn't have a wife. Please, if there is a God, let me be an uncle. Like I said, I was lost. You have to be lost. Real damn lost, for the movement to find you. Seeing them walk down the street is the earliest thing I can recall. Properly recall. Recall as clear as the constant interrogations by the spooks over the last few days. It was like, do awakenings have opposites? Not an enlightenment, an endarkment. Yeah, I like that. My awareness, my senses shrank, not only in the adrenaline-fueled laser-focus way, although there was plenty of that, too. Senses crippled by the endarkment included things like sense of place, of self, of meaning. Shit, how do I put this so you don't compare it to booze or drugs or whatever? It's like someone put the little voice in my head, the thing that watches and listens to the input from my eyes and ears in a box. Then, whoever put the little voice in there pointed a gun at said box, then fired said gun repeatedly, while screaming, "Don't get out of the box. Some crazy guy with a gun is out here." I knew what was happening, but I didn't. I was in control only insofar as I made the conscious decision to obey the endarkenment. I knew I could disobey, but I didn't want to, because if I did, my existential abyss would be deeper than ever. Before I knew it, I was off the bench and walking towards the group, my feet adopting that loose-kneed, wide, horizontal swinging walk in pendulum time to God knows what. I didn't decide to do this. I just decided not to decide not to. I told you it was hard to put into words, didn't I? With every step, my mind sank deeper into that box, and our metaphorical gunshots were louder and louder. By the time I'd crossed the park through the smoke and reached the cluster of like-minded people in the street, there wasn't much. Whoever I was left. He was in his head, in that box where the endarkenment put him, surrounding himself willingly out of fear for what would happen if he didn't. A knowledge that it was already too late. That it had been too late, since he had lost himself in his own unfulfilling life. It was the understanding that if he chose to disobey now, it would merely force the impostor's hand, and he would be made to. The endarkenment would bulge its way inside him violently, would ruin him if he denied it. So better to let it enter him willingly, right? And in a twisted way, I kind of wanted it, I think. At least, at first. Just not like that. It all escalated so fast. I remember a small but not insignificant relief churning with the voiceless swell of boxed-up panic had become within my mind. A pervasive mental exhalation, atomically small but not enough to be forgotten, because something was taking me, taking him away from whoever he was, and the listlessness he wallowed in. I remember the wildfire, the first of many. It chased us out of the town, curling around the forest to the west to ensure we steered clear of the freeway and headed back out to the desert. Just like I was supposed to. We didn't mind by that point. We really didn't have a mind to mind with. We'd long since been reduced to pure momentum by that point. Had been since long before the smoke and heat and ash chased us through the eastern forest away from the sleepy town where whoever previously owned this face died. Well, not quite this face. It's a bit busted, but you get it. Descent into Endarkened isn't a gradual decline. It's a steep stumble into a shapeless, formless ravine, one that swallows you up before you even realize you've lost your balance. It reached out to those going nowhere from the movement, and by the time they know they've joined, they're already pendulum sway striding in time with the rest. There were 7 of them in the streets by the park gate, 15 of us by the time the town couldn't be seen through the tree line. The movement out on the sun-baked flats was 200 strong. When the rock fell on my head, well, over 1,000 swing-stepping victims of the Endarkened surrounded me. At first, though, 7. One who'd been with the movement for weeks, leathery and toothless and dead-eyed, leading the arrangement. 5 lost but functioning office drones I recognized from other cubicle farms in the town followed. And then, of course, there was the other one, the old woman in the wheelchair. You can't join the movements if you can't walk. You gotta be able to walk. That's why the infirm pensioner was screaming at the Endarkened lady, pushing her chair through the smoke-filled town and forest. It was her daughter, I think, the woman now walking with the movement, or her granddaughter. It didn't matter once we were on the other side of the woods, though, did it? They were ahead of me, high heels step-swinging in time with my own, while wheelchair spurs squeaked. The 15 or so of us following the long-since Endarkened stray from the main grouping. The malnourished one that somehow slipped through the flames and pulled us back out with it. The old woman was shrieking the whole way, antique lungs giving more gusto than you'd have thought possible, looking at her hunched and shriveled frame. None of us reacted when the wheelchair tipped forward and clattered down the hill. None of the 16 pairs of eyes moved from their fixed gaze straight ahead. Not a single pair of lips parted that didn't belong to an elderly mouth, howling in pain. The part of the man that still remained in that box in my head wanted to react, sure. He needed to run down that root-laden incline to help the defenseless nonagenarian writhing in agony at the foot of the hill. I could only see the back of her daughter or granddaughter's head, but I knew the tall blonde woman in the navy blue skirt suit didn't blink. I hadn't since I got up off that park bench. None of us had. We'd just walked, already for a few miles, following the naked, rakish stranger with the same uniform, pendulous steps. Inside his box, the man I was, the man I still am, I guess, screamed when I got to the foot of the hill. You know, the warmth of that broken old woman soaking into my socks is the last thing I remember feeling on my feet before the blisters, I think. The pressing heat of her ooze up past my ankle, the moisture of her most intimate abdominal regions filling my shoes as my foot came down inside the gaping rupture. It would have made me puke if my impulses and reflexes had any semblance of control left. Shit, I'm lightheaded thinking about it now, even with... not yet. I can't. We didn't stop to help her. We didn't stop walking. That's the takeaway. The businesswoman who'd been pushing the wheelchair from the moments the endarkment took her until a stray tree root in the spokes capsized it down the hill, was 20 paces ahead of me. Plenty of time to watch through the bullet holes in my box as she reached the base of the slope. There wasn't enough of me left to register the crunch that pierced the smoky forest air as the wet snapping of bone. There was enough left to feel the gut-tightening wave of dread that comes with such a realization, though. Daughter or granddaughter's high heels came down on an almost centuries-old spine with full force. A considerable pressure considering the woman's height and broad frame. The old woman didn't stop moving, not until long after her child or grandchild removed the foot from the yawning visceral chasm of her thin, brittle back. The pointed heel went straight through, crushing the vertebrae of the lower back, breaking through skin, piercing tired organs. A wrinkled kidney, like an overripe plum, remained impaled when the next swing step pulled the footwear from the pensioner. The silver-haired body didn't stop its gurgled moans, even by the points the red-brown lump slid off the shoe a few unison movements later. Discarded several feet from its owner, to be consumed by the chitinous things in the undergrowth, hungrily eyeing the spoils while they waited for us to pass. Her broken body was still twitching when my foot sank into it 20 swing steps later. I couldn't look down to take in the spectacle. But I'm not sad about that shitty laptop. Not at all. Being unable to see where I treaded or what I stopped to pick up, my eyes being locked ahead and not on where my feet fell or what my hands held, is the only reason I didn't smash my face into the ground so hard my skull cracked open when I became myself again. Well, that's a lie. Looking into the sky for the first time in 3 months and subsequently pissing down my leg would still be the first thing I did. After that rock, I mean. I don't know, though. I don't think I'd have made it even a day without trying to end it, if I had to see. No, I don't have to. Not yet, at least. You never get used to it. The faint but noticeable resistance as your foot pushes into someone, as you drive your weight through them with the merciless and unrelenting determination of a machine. The slight bump in your step as your limb invades their person, the hiccup in your gait when the wet suction pulls at your ankles as you lift them again. Nobody turned their heads. We walked past the broken mother or grandmother until the forest thinned out into desert. The wildfire had served its purpose. It had shepherded us back to the flock. Really, the old woman's death was a small mercy. The flats were wide and, well, flat. We walked for weeks before we stumbled across another town, surrounded all the while by the Apaches circling like buzzards. Always you could hear them overhead. The whumping of their blades, crisp and clear, even over the scapes of 1,000 grinding jaws and the endless pleading of the unfortunate few in our midst not taken by the embarkment. The silver-haired pensioner's abrupt collapse down the root-covered slope saved her from experiencing what so many others in her position had to endure in their final hours. Better to die a slow death in the forest than an agonizingly slow death in the desert, while you watch your daughter or granddaughter become one of the movement, right? There were more of them than you'd think in the 200-strong cluster of other Endarkened strays that awaited us. At least 5 among every 50 swaying figures. The movement only attracted the lost, the listless, those without place or purpose. A surprising number of those can be found in low-paid healthcare positions. Others were taken from the ranks of Americans nobly, but self-destructively meeting the needs of helpless loved ones without support of their own. Those pushing wheelchairs when they fell into the endarkment, like the woman in the blue-skirt suit had been, still pushed them. Some of these chairs were empty, the occupier long since fallen from the seat to be trampled into the flats by our pendulous, synchronized stampede. Others were not. In a few writhed, rasping, elderly men and women. In others sat sun-baked individuals of all ages, their only common traits being an inability to walk themselves due to injury, illness, or genetics. You could hear all of them moaning, begging, pleading, a quiet chorus of terrified confusion harmonizing with the crunch, crunch of grinding jaws. The occupants of the chairs lasted for days, sometimes. They say the human body can't survive for long without food or water, but that's easy to say when you're not the one slowly drying out while your body eats itself over 48 to 72 agonizing hours. The desert always took them in the end. Most of the Endarkened that swing-stepped, with dry knuckles wrapped around wheelchair handles, carted a bloated, leaking corpse. Their own milk-eyed, purple-skinned reminder, a waxen flesh effigy to whoever they'd been before the Endarkenment erased them from themselves. Over the 3 months I walked, there was no point at which I got used to the wheelchairs, especially the ones that didn't have grown men and women in them, the ones that belonged to parents. The strollers were 1,000 times worse, though. Sometimes it would take days for the screeching to... No. I can't. I won't. Let's take a breath, shall we? I need to take a minute. I've just unpacked a lot. You've probably got a lot of questions, too, I'll bet. I'm afraid I can't provide many answers. All I've got is a long list of I don't knows, but I guess I could at least expand on what they are. Maybe it'll help. Help who, you ask? Your guess is as good as mine, shitty laptop. When I first arrived here, after the rock and the sky, the spooks agreed to tell me what they knew, within reason, on the condition I stopped shrieking at them. I wasn't exactly trusting or willing to cooperate at first. I still remembered the whistling, you know. There was always a little bit of me in that box that wanted to come out the other side of this. That part spent far too many nights drowning in bated breath panic, hoping the next step swing wouldn't put me in the path of the shrill shrieks of whiffing air, praying I didn't get singled out. To gain my trust and obedience, they tried a different approach than their usual, to corroborate rather than interrogate. The spooks, yes, you two, Flotsam and Jetsam, standing outside the door, waiting for me to finish writing this. Reckon that the movement is some kind of cult or group psychosis, or at least they did when it first appeared about 6 years back, a few months before the wildfires out west started getting real frequent. They observed from a distance, but obvious questions started cropping up pretty quickly. Questions I shared pretty much as soon as I'd managed to stop screaming at the ceiling above the bed. I walked in the desert, non-stop, for 3 months. I didn't sleep or touch a drop of water at that time. The spooks came to the same conclusion about this as I did. I should be dead. The movement. Every one of the Endarkened pendulously swing-stepping through the salt flats ought to have expired months ago. The 1,000-strong swaying cornfield of dead-eyed teeth grinders shouldn't be biologically possible. You try telling the movement that, though. We lasted way longer than we should have out there. Walked so much it gives me a headache trying to comprehend it. I should be dead. I'm not immortal, though. Oh, trust me, the Endarkenment doesn't protect you from death, pain, or any other kind of suffering. The tea light of awareness, watching the world from its cardboard box, spent every minute of those 3 months screaming. You're not immune from any of it. You just get to experience it all through tunnel vision bullet holes. Many members of the movement die. Just not from dehydration, malnourishment, exhaustion, or disease. The whistling notwithstanding, once you're in the movement, you don't die until your legs give out. Once you fall and you can't walk, though, you're fair game. just like I should have been. I'll get around to telling you about the rock, though, shitty laptop. Don't worry. I knew the Endarkenment had a psychological effect from the moment I got to the desert. It took the spooks a few months of observation, apparently, to work out that the movement wasn't on some kind of new narcotic. Some sort of super crack or something was their initial theory, you see. One that could prolong the time before a body gave in to fatigue, thirst, or dysentery, cholera, or other diseases. Gifted to us by our diet. Only a few days of desert walking were necessary for me to figure I was changed beyond the absolute mental destruction. Changed, but not immortal. Even if the burning in my everything wasn't a clue that my mortality had only been adjusted, not erased. One of the first swing-stepping wraiths I saw die collapsed not long after I arrived. The naked male figure's legs were caked in dried shit near his thighs and dried blood near his ankles. There weren't enough left of his feet to say near his feet. He toppled over when the last chunks of his heels and arches weren't enough to keep him balanced. The rest of us carried on swinging by, ignoring his sudden screams as the embarkment left and it all came flooding back. He couldn't walk anymore, you know. You can't be part of the movement if you can't walk. Didn't take long for enough feet to fall on him that he lapsed into silence, though. His flesh had been out in the sun so long it didn't resist any of the swing-stepping limbs that pressed down upon it. And Endarkened, only a few paces ahead of me in the procession, stopped to feed. I'm glad I didn't. I was always glad when I didn't. I still did, though. You know. Not then, not that time, but I still did. Still stopped so many times. Still stopped when my legs laterally swung me next to that. No. Anyway, the spooks worked out. We remained just as vulnerable to most things when the first Endarkened found their way into a popular center. Several years and many whistles and wildfires before I joined the movement. They already knew proximity to us was a gamble. The spooks didn't understand the predications. None of us were exactly able to explain why we were swaying through the desert with that clenched-jawed parade. But even the Spaghetti Soup Intelligence Service aren't dumb enough to miss that agents they sent to observe didn't always come back. They also weren't dumb enough to miss that said agents could be seen swing-stepping with the rest of us through the drones I'd hear zipping above me every so often. The ones hiding with the Apaches just out of my fixed line of sight. This understanding is why they didn't think twice before gunning down the first Endarkened that stumbled into a backwater Midwest town. Bath salts were the cover-up. You might remember the news stories back in the mid-2010s. Quote-unquote crazy people jacked up on salts, or crocodile, or PCP, or whatever, rampaging like infected cannibals from a zombie flick. All bullshit, shitty laptop. All of it. The first of many cover-ups, the spooks sink tax dollars into black box accounts to keep zipped, apparently. The FBC INSA in black, and later the National Guard, used a lot of those idiosyncratic national calamities to keep everything out of the public eye while they figured out what the fuck to do about the movement. The wildfires were the first solution. Then came the whistling when there were too many of us for the flamethrowers and excuses about global warming to contain. Not every forest fire is started by an army grunt shepherding the movement, you know. They were happening anyway. Climate change just meant that nobody noticed when they started new ones. Fire seems to be the only thing that I instinctively avoided. Although Flotsam and Jetsam uncomfortably refused to tell me what kind of experiment had led to the spooks figuring that out. I know we didn't avoid any other kinds of danger. Only the flames, only the smoke. I watched naked, leathery figures swing-step themselves down hidden ravines by the dozens, saw them lurch into oncoming freight trains and off of buildings, and, of course, kept swaying forward in one grand movement throughout the whistling nights. Even with the Endarkenment, everything in me would tense on the nights I'd hear the Humvees over the circling military-grade vultures above. I burst into tears when Flotsam and Jetsam admitted the National Guard had opted for machine guns over precision rifles to cut down the costs. Cheaper to pay 10 untrained recruits letting off hundreds of rounds a minute than a platoon of crack-shot snipers. Sorry, shitty laptop. I just can't believe I had to endure the whistling on top of everything else, because our cheapskate government wants to save a few $1,000s. Things got to a point, just before I arrived, where they had to thin our numbers. A cull. They'd wiped the movement out completely more than once, but it never stuck. It kept restraining itself somehow, spontaneously manifesting in a new patient zero they still didn't have enough of an understanding to, understand the selection process. Neither do I, before you ask, F and J reading this in the future. Containment of the situation with deliberate wildfires to steer the direction of the movement back into the salt flats worked for a year or two. Then things escalated in 2016. More people than ever felt a spontaneous calling and traveled across the country or fixed the precautions when encountering the movement in the wild as I had. They started running out of the black bags, to use a broad metaphor. Then, a leaked video of the movement by a rock climber getting footage for YouTube kept a steady trickle incoming when it started popping up more times than they could scrub it from the net. Thousands of views would sometimes mean hundreds falling into Endarkenment at their computer screens. Someone in the Pentagon decided enough was enough. The spook's solution: get some grunts as close as they can without being within Endarkening proximity, blindfold them, then point them in our direction and have them open fire. Give them enough ammunition for a sustained 5-minute barrage. 5 minutes is a long time when your next swing step could collide with any of the thousands of whistling pieces of hot metal swarming the air. One missed my nose by a half-inch. I can still remember the fear. The sound of the distant high-caliber mounted machine guns were faint. The dull, wet thuds as the rounds connected with swaying bodies in the midnight darkness around me wasn't. 300 agonizing seconds of swaying blindly forward, panicked but unable to run, duck, or even scream in terror. Minutes that felt like days, chained to the burden of knowing the next thud might come with a flash of agony as pointed brass rips through your flesh, or that it may be the last thing you hear before the lights turn out entirely. Of course, on more than one of the whistling nights, I would have welcomed that. Like I said, though, shitty laptop, a small part of the consciousness within that bullet-ridden box still wanted to pull through. Was still cursing itself for not getting off that park bench sooner and driving back to where I used to live. Back to the woman and the children, and the place and purpose. I'd stop sometimes on the whistling night. We'd only stop for one reason: to eat. What did we eat, you ask? What did the swaying congregation fill their stomachs with so the unnatural mass momentum could continue for as long as possible? The dead. We ate the dead. I would say the nights the Humvees showed up were the worst feeds. Those times I'd stop and crouch without bending to scoop a fistful of meat from one of the recently fallen while a million near-death experiences whistled through the air. I would say they were the worst, but that would be a lie. No, I can't. Shit, I have to, don't I? If not now, then when? They're going to ask, Flotsam and Jetsam, or one of the others. They'll no doubt start asking more questions after reading what I've typed up to you. Shitty laptop. They'll reckon it's connected to this thing on my chest. You watch. Won't believe the truth, I'll bet, even though there's no explanation for any of this. Especially if you can't see the sky. And if you can see the sky, you're already too far gone to help. Christ. The first feeding was pretty bad, I'll say that. The fixed gaze might have saved me from some scarring visual memories, but the cardboard box did nothing to protect against taste and mouthfeel registering to my fractured psyche. I hadn't seen another member of the movement eat before I did myself. I remember feeling relieved at first. I'd stopped when none of the others had. Was I free? Was I special? I watched the back of the head in front of me sway further and further away. If I could exhale, I'd have breathed the biggest sigh of relief in history when I didn't feel the glooping warmth of the swollen corpse the Endarkened had walked through seep into my shoe like the old woman back in the forest. Then there was confusion. My point of view was descending. For 3 months, I ate corpses. My diet consisted of nothing but rotten flesh, mouthful after mouthful of necrotic meat at various stages of decomposition. I don't know which meals made me wish I could still throw up more. The bloated, waxy, putrid ones that had long since started to rot, or the recently dead ones, still almost as warm on the inside as the sunlight on their skin. The first feeding was pretty bad. It wasn't the worst, but it was up there. My fixed straight-ahead gaze might have saved me from some scarring visual memories, but the mental cardboard box did nothing to protect against taste and mouthfeel registering to my fractured psyche. I hadn't seen another member of the movement eat before I did. I'd been swing-stepping with them for only a few hours when it happened. I stopped. I remember feeling relieved at first. I'd stopped. None of the others had stopped. Was I free? Was I special? I watched the back of the head in front of me swaying further and further away. If I could exhale, I'd have breathed the biggest sigh of relief in history when I didn't feel the gloopy warmth of the swollen corpse the Endarkened ahead walked through, seeping into my shoe. Then there was confusion. My point of view descended, and I was lowering closer and closer to the ground, watching the back of heads in front of me change to swaying lumbers, then knees and ankles. Why was I crouching? Why had I stopped if I wasn't free? My nostrils curled. Something punched my olfactory senses in the face. The clinging, cloying, gut-turning sweetness anyone who's pulled over inadvertently close to week-old roadkill will recognize. Inside the cardboard box, the shreds of the man I was, the man I am, couldn't help but picture that bloated body. The way its eyes bulged rather than sank, pointing out in different directions. The color of the skin stuck clear in what remained of my mind. That purple, bluish, edging, yellowing near flesh tone that existed somewhere in the uncanny valley, so well visited, even kids know to avoid it. Then it happened, and there was only unrestrained terror. It was warm in my hands, wet. I could feel the grease of it squeezing between my fingers as they clenched a fistful of exposed and trampled innards, intestines, liver, kidneys. I couldn't see what specific organ it was, but that didn't matter. Inside the bullet hole-ridden box, I was screaming, even before I understood why I'd just crouched down and scooped up a handful of rotting corpse. It was warm, warmer than the dry desert air, and the wet sloshing and slathering of meat being pulled away from the carcass brought fresh waves of the nostril-plugging, gag-inducing muskiness. The stench of mulching human flesh was so strong I almost passed out when the Endarkened raised my hijacked arm to my face. I don't think it would have let me lose consciousness, though. It didn't even let me puke when it rammed the fistful of blackened, stinking offal into my face. My jaw was clenching and grinding. I told you that already, shitty laptop. It's why I don't have teeth for them to do dental checks on. Our jaws didn't unclench when it made us feed. I crouched on the ground, surrounded on all sides by others in the movement, swing-stepping around me, pushing lumps of darkened, pustulous human innards between my grinding teeth. Maggots and worms writhed and wriggled in the pockets of my cheeks. My eyes stayed bolt ahead the whole time, unable to even well up with tears. If I hadn't realized just how fucked my situation had become since getting up off that park bench, it hit me then. It was all my pseudo-mind could pseudo-think about as the Endarkened used my arm to force fistful after fistful of acrid, necrotic meat between the gaps of my teeth. The corpse had been at the front of the slow-moving throng when it died. It had been there a while by the time I got to it. I was there with it for far too long. We didn't stop feeding until the rest of the movement had passed. I kept grinding those worms and maggots and chunks of bloated dead man between my clenched jaws until the last of them took a swing step by me. Then, without any warning, I stood and followed. And so it went, every time, until... Fuck, I did. Fuck. When I told the spooks about what the movement did to its dead, one of them puked. The other conceded they'd read some reports from previous agents about the necro-cannibalism, but had hoped they were false. He asked me what it tasted like. He was shocked, I think. I didn't know what else to say. I didn't really have an answer for him. Not one that does it justice. I mean, it's decomposing human flesh. It tastes about as vile as the sentence, "I am eating decomposing human flesh," feels to read. I never got used to it. Even at the point of endarkenment, and days in the desert had whittled my awareness down to a barely conscious cognitive flatline. No matter how far gone I was from being an I, there was always just enough wherewithal to feel utter disgust and revulsion at my actions. Fuck. I'm going to have to tell you about it, shitty laptop. The worst feeding. The worst and last. Remember how I told you about the moms pushing the strollers through the desert? Well, I can still feel the nauseating swelling in my chest that started when I stopped next to its still, lifeless form. I remember the panic, the terrifying realization that I hadn't carried on swing-stepping past like its mother. The woman some 20 unison movements ahead, no doubt howling into a mental cardboard box of her own. I've never known time to elongate the way it did as I crouched down beside that pram. I'd been with the movement for 3 months, 3 long months, sustaining myself on nothing but the dead. I gave up on fighting it before I knew there was an it to fight. But that last feed, it was too much. The utter, disgusting inhumanity of that act triggered something in me. Something about stopping next to that final body was too much, even for the Endarkened to force me to see through. I just wished I'd had the seizure before I began. I don't remember it too well, the actual moment I snapped. I was lost in the harrowing sensation of something acrid, maggot-sodden, cascading down my dry throat. The revulsion I always managed to feel when eating the last 3 months had spiraled into a cacophony. Everything went sideways. I was dizzy, vision tunnel-focused beyond the usual effect of the Endarkened. Then, from out of nowhere, a small miracle. A voice in my head. My voice. No. It was small and faint, barely more than a whisper, but it was enough. There was a blinding stab of pain behind my eyes, a full-on spontaneous cluster migraine, My muscles convulsed and spasmed, launching me violently to my left with a mighty but involuntary kick. I felt another flash of white-hot agony on my skull, but this time not from within. I'd landed on something somewhat jagged and hard. The rock that set me free. The head trauma severed my connection to the sky, I think. Just long enough for my overwhelming panic, disgust, and delirium to retake the reins. The change was immediate. The endarkenment was yanked from my mind like a tooth pulled with string in a slamming door. All the pain it had allowed me to endure came flooding through in an instant. My scream was long, guttural, bestial. A howl of anguish, a lamentation of fate, the likes of which I doubt any man has made. I didn't know who I was, or how I'd got there, but I knew I was in hell. Especially when I opened my eyes. After a solid minute of screw-faced wailing, from despair as much as pain, my eyelids found themselves prying apart. The man I used to be died on that park bench. The first sight that the man I emerged as ever saw was the thing in the sky. The closest source of terror to me was the other Endarkened. The movement had stopped moving. They'd also stopped being forced to look straight ahead. They were, all of them, looking down at me. The expressions of utter hatred in their eyes made my renewed inner monologue regret leaving its bullet-riddled cardboard box. Every single face was locked in a curled, nostriled, bug-eyed snarl, and I could tell the contempt didn't come from the endarkment. It came from them, from the once people inside their mental prisons. They hated me, because through rebellion against the sky thing's control in hitting that rock, I'd found freedom. So, I thought, I'll level, though, shitty laptop. I wasn't thinking much of anything for very long. I could see past their shoulders and near hairless scalps of the unmoving movement. Could see above, past even the spooks whomping Apaches, and the azure desert sky beyond. Or, at least, where the sky should have been. But the sky wasn't there anymore. If I could have looked up sooner, I'd have known it vanished the moment I got up from that park bench. The source of the endarkenment covered every inch of space above, from horizon to horizon. A giant, gaping, circular mouth large enough to swallow planets. This is what I gave the spooks in exchange for their knowledge. They can't see it, you see, shitty laptop. Flotsam and Jetsam look out the window, and all they see is sky. They don't see the trillions of rows of snaggle-toothed gums, the untouchable yellow fangs, the swarms of eyes peering out from the pustulous stump gum roots of every tooth. I don't know if they believed me about the arms, shitty laptop. Hell, you might not either, even though you're just a machine. I can still see the silhouettes of them when I look out the window now. All those hundreds of miles away. Those 1,000-odd human arms reaching down from the sky thing's distant throat. The hand at the end of each 100-elbowed limb, clasping the head of each of the endarkened, pulling the movement across the desert. The spooks can't see them. You can't until they've got you. Do you understand? They're invisible until it's already too late. I thought I was free, even as the nightmare above me had screamed back into unconsciousness. I thought the limp hands dangling overhead was a sign I could stop step-swinging, that I'd escaped before fully becoming one of the dry, leathery things snarling down at me. All such nonsense was knocked from my blackening conscience when I realized that all eyes above were locked on my prone and howling form. The Endarkened movement and the countless rotting gum-socketed eyes of the reeky sky maw.
At last, one strong enough to carry my seed.
The final pain was much like the last feed, the worst. It hit me in the head and chest simultaneously. Every word of the distorted voice that cut through my thoughts came with a fresh flash migraine. My blunt teeth clattered in my yellowed gums. The toothless, blistered soles that were what remained curled further in on themselves with each new, warped syllable. The chest pain was an altogether different hell, shitty laptop. Right in the center of my ribcage, a biting, tearing, rending sensation that sent acres of orange heat lancing across my nervous system. Do you know why I think the man I am now believes in miracles, shitty laptop? Because as the pain became too much and I lapsed into unconsciousness, the whistling started again. According to Flotsam and Jetsam, one of the drone operators had seen my obvious defiance of the keep feeding until you find yourself at the back rule. They sent out a squad of confirmed Endarkenment-proof jarheads to get me, and they've been studying me in this hospital ever since. Can't say I blame them. Even though I don't remember who I was, I'm curious to know just how the hell I'm still alive after 3 months with no water, no sleep, and an exclusively necro-cannibalistic diet. I don't think they plan on warning the public about the movement, the Endarkenment, or the Sky Maw. No, they can just keep starting wildfires and thinning the numbers whenever it gets too large to keep contained. Here's the thing, though, shitty laptop. You're a shitty laptop. You're a device Flotsam or Jetsam drummed up from the lost and found of this equally shitty hospital. You have a Wi-Fi connection. Your browser isn't password protected. Well, since I've already done the legwork, shitty laptop, how's about you and I do a good deed? I'm sure there's some blog or something in the browser history of whatever used to own you. Why don't we do a little copy-paste from this document before it's saved to the spook's thumb drive? I might not get another chance, you know, shitty laptop. Not if any more arms start reaching out of the circular mouth that's growing in my chest.